They didn't tell you that desire isn't born from love, it's born from its absence. That the biggest mistake when trying to win someone over is offering too much, revealing too much, loving too much. What truly attracts is not overt sweetness, but subtle poison. Seduction in its rawest form has never been about connection, it's about control. And that's precisely why the most effective tactics are also the darkest. Today, you'll enter forbidden territory. The most toxic laws of seduction, not the ones you read in self-help books or see in romantic comedies, but the ones that have quietly shaped empires, destroyed nations, and continue to be applied by those who understand that love, when well managed, is a weapon more lethal than any sword. The science is clear. The human brain doesn't differentiate well between love and obsession. Both trigger the same neurological circuits of addiction. Dopamine, serotonin, cortisol, substances that should balance the body, become an internal trap. And on this very battlefield between desire and desperation, the true masters of emotional influence emerge. They aren't the most beautiful, nor the most charismatic. They're the ones who understand the mathematics behind magnetism. And as Nietzsche would say, what is done for love is always beyond good and evil. But what if love is just the socially acceptable disguise for a well-crafted manipulation? Think of Cleopatra, who turned the tide of two empires using not her beauty, but her ability to build mystery and challenge around herself. Think of Casanova, who claimed that the art of seduction wasn't winning a woman over, but making her believe she was winning you over. Think of yourself, watching this now, remembering that time someone purposefully disappeared, feigned disinterest, or made you compete with others for attention. The pain was real, but what you didn't realize was that it was an emotional chess move. And maybe, just maybe, you've done this to someone too. And here's the uncomfortable truth. No one is immune. You may think you're in control, that you're above these tactics, but all it takes is the right stimulus at the right time, and you find yourself trapped in a cycle of expectation, rejection, and hope. Seduction is an invisible operating system running in the background, manipulating your clicks, your likes, your desires, and even your regrets. As Ortega y Gasset said, love is surrender provoked by fascination. And fascination, my friends, is never gratuitous. In the next few minutes, we'll delve into 3 laws that aren't just effective, they're lethal. They work not because they appeal to romanticism, but because they directly attack the blind spots of the human brain. They don't ask for permission. They hijack attention, cultivate dependency, and create a kind of bond that doesn't liberate, only consumes. You'll see historical examples, psychological explanations, and, if you're honest with yourself, you'll recognize patterns you've experienced, inflicted, or suffered. But a warning. This content is not for those looking for cute formulas on how to start a conversation or win someone over in 3 steps. This is for those who want to understand the power dynamics behind seduction and perhaps take control of them. And this control comes at a cost. Because once you understand the inner workings of attraction, you'll never look at love the same way again. You'll see patterns where you once saw spontaneity, moves where you once saw coincidence, and decisions where you once saw fate. Law 1. The pleasure of prohibition. They say true love knows no barriers, that when it's meant to be, nothing can stop 2 souls from uniting. But history's great seducers knew something that naive romantics prefer to ignore. What truly sparks desire isn't permission, it's prohibition. The more difficult, the more tempting. The riskier, the more exciting. The human brain, in its irrational quest for reward, becomes hostage to what is denied. This is what psychologists call psychological reactance, the automatic tendency to desire what has been restricted. And this is where the most dangerous game of seduction begins. The one where you don't need to be desirable, you just need to be unattainable. Crechetta was a poor, orphaned young woman with no name in society and no extraordinary beauty. Don Juan, the legendary Spanish libertine, made a practice of corrupting the unattainable, but this time he would be the victim. After seducing and abandoning Crechetta as yet another of his momentary conquests, he moved on with his life. Years later, he finds her in a park, transformed. Rich, mysterious, with a son by her side. She doesn't greet him with hatred, nor with need. She rejects him. She declares herself married, untouchable, And it is at that precise moment that Don Juan, the man who has never loved anyone, begins to go mad. He follows her, he watches, he fantasizes, he envies the man she is supposedly married to. For the first time, he isn't the one manipulating her. He's the one bleeding. He sends letters, he begs, he offers to run away with her. And when she finally receives him again, she reveals it was all an act. She wasn't rich. She wasn't married. The son wasn't his. It was all a performance to trigger in Don Juan the only emotion that could make a seducer truly desire someone, the impossibility of having her. This story isn't just a tale of emotional revenge. It's a manual on how human desire works. When something is within reach, the brain calculates its value as accessible. When something is withdrawn, denied, hidden, the same brain activates areas related to challenge, scarcity, and unpredictable reward. In other words, the more unattainable you seem, the more symbolic value you acquire. It's the same principle that makes a restaurant with a line seem more appetizing than an empty one. The same that makes the forbidden always seem more delicious. But let's go beyond the metaphor. In practice, how do you create this illusion of inaccessibility? Robert Greene, in The Art of Seduction, explains that the secret is not simply to walk away, but to strategically surrender and withdraw. First, you show interest, you stimulate, you create tension. You make the other person imagine possibilities. Then, you put up a barrier. Social, moral, emotional. Something that says, yes, I feel something, but I can't. And that's when the poison begins to work. These barriers can be external. Religion, cultural differences, social status. Or internal. I'm not ready for a relationship. My life is too complicated. I can't get involved with someone right now. These are simple phrases, but when said at the right time, they create more impact than any declaration of love. Because they activate one of the deepest desires of the human psyche, to be the exception to the rule. When someone says they can't get involved with anyone, but continues to show you signs of affection, you don't just feel desired, you feel special. And then, everything that was rational becomes emotionally inescapable. And if you think this tactic is the preserve of sentimental manipulators, consider how it's used by artists, leaders, and even brands. Marilyn Monroe blended explicit sensuality with an inaccessible innocence. She was the archetype of the woman who provoked with her gaze, but who always seemed beyond touch. Machiavelli, when writing The Prince, warned that a seductive leader should never appear too available. Mystery maintains power. And in the corporate world, companies like Apple launch products with intentional scarcity. The harder they are to obtain, the more desired they become. But here's the paradox. The more you crave something because it's forbidden, the less you question whether you really need it. People who use this tactic don't win you over for who they are, but for what they deny you. And by placing you in this cycle of frustrated reward, they create an emotional dependence. You begin to live for the moments when they give you crumbs of affection. And this, according to behavioral neuroscience studies, is the most powerful type of conditioning, intermittent reinforcement. The same one used in casinos to addict gamblers. And here arises a brutal contradiction. The most intense relationships you've ever experienced may have been the least healthy. Because what you called an intense connection was, in fact, a carefully crafted intermittent stimulation, a mixture of promises and refusals, of presence and withdrawal. You weren't in love with the person, you were addicted to their absence. And this is the most dangerous aspect of the prohibition law. It doesn't build love, it builds obsession. That's why the greatest seducers in history weren't the most available. They were the most enigmatic. Casanova would disappear for days after nights of passion, making his lovers desire him even more. Mata Hari mixed sexuality with secrecy, presenting herself as both dancer and spy. And even in literature, characters like Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights conquer because they are intense, yes, but also fickle. They give and take. They come close and withdraw. And it's in this emotional back and forth that desire takes root. The law of prohibition works so well because it plays on our pride. No one wants to feel like they weren't chosen, that they weren't good enough. So, when someone tells us, "I can't be with you," while simultaneously expressing desire, our minds collapse, and we begin to fight, to prove ourselves, to compete, to idealize, to insist, until, even if that person isn't extraordinary, they become unique, an emotional myth. But there's a second side to this coin, because just as this tactic gives you power, it also demands composure. Keeping someone in this state of tension requires emotional control, timing, and, most importantly, the willingness to watch someone suffer for you. It's not a technique for the insecure. It's a weapon for those willing to use absence as a tool of domination. And this domination always exacts a price. So, how do you apply this law strategically, and without becoming an emotional psychopath? The answer lies in intention. If your goal is to create initial attraction, being a little inaccessible can indeed generate curiosity and perceived value. But if you perpetuate this game, you create a relationship based on imbalance, and eventually the victim notices. And when they do, they don't just pull away, they shut down. Because the pain of repeated rejection doesn't teach love. It teaches self-protection. And here's the great lesson that few understand. Being forbidden is powerful, but being authentic is what sustains it. You can use the barrier as bait, but what keeps someone by your side isn't the game. It's the truth you reveal when the game is over. If you only know how to seduce by creating absence, you'll never know how to love by maintaining presence. And living eternally in this dynamic is a prisoner of your own strategy. So, use this law like a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. A dose of inaccessibility can create attraction, but an overdose creates trauma. The secret is giving enough to awaken desire and pulling back enough to fuel the mystery. It's a balance few master. But those who dominate shape the world around them or destroy everyone they touch. And if this first law has already reminded you of someone or yourself, get ready. Because the next one isn't content to create desire from a distance. It goes further. It eliminates everything that protects a person from you. It isolates, it intoxicates, it builds a new world where only you and them exist, where the other person no longer has external mirrors and begins to see themselves only through your eyes. The second law is about total domination, about surgically severing emotional support networks, and about how to turn someone into a hostage, without them realizing they're in a prison. Let's dive now into the heart of darkness, and show you what it truly means to seduce someone to the point of total surrender. Law 2. Silent isolation. Have you ever wondered why certain relationships seem to consume a person completely, as if they disappear from the world and orbit only around their partner? It's not chance. It's not love. It's strategy. The second stage of toxic seduction isn't winning someone over from a distance. It's eliminating everything around them, leaving only you. If the first law plants the seed of obsession, the second reaps emotional dependence. This is called silent isolation, and its effectiveness is so brutal that it has been used to destroy entire empires. Imagine someone taking away your friends, your routine, your habits, your references, your hobbies, your family, your escape valves. What's left? Vulnerability. Human beings, by nature, are collective. We define ourselves through external relationships, social mirrors. So when all that is cut off, we begin to seek direction. Where? In the only remaining reference point, the person who isolated us. This isn't emotional conspiracy theory. It's neuroscience, sociology, and above all, history. In ancient China, during the spring and autumn period, a king named Gujian was captured by Fuchai, ruler of an enemy kingdom. Instead of executing him, Fuchai did something far more perverse. He humiliated him. He turned the king into a servant, forcing him to work in the stables, tending horses like a commoner. After years of submission, Gujian was released, but he did not forget. Back in his kingdom, he meticulously planned his revenge, and his plan involved a seductive weapon called Shishi. Shishi was trained for 3 years to be not only beautiful but lethal. She learned to sing, dance, debate, and charm. Every gesture, every smile, every tear was shaped to pierce Fuchai's heart like an arrow of desire. And when she was sent as a diplomatic gift, she executed her mission perfectly. Fuchai was enchanted, fell in love, and most importantly, lost. He began to neglect his advisors, ignore his commitments, and withdraw from politics. Shishi didn't just steal his attention, she dismantled his ties to the world. The result? By the time Fuchai realized he had lost everything, it was too late. Gujian's army was surrounding the capital. And without allies, without advisors, without preparation, the king chose death. Seduction had won by the slowest and most precise route, emotional isolation. This is not an isolated case. Cult leaders do the same. Criminals of passion do the same. Narcissists and emotional manipulators do the same. First, they become everything to you. Then, they make you forget that there was a you before them. It's what psychology calls affective colonization. The victim begins to live under the gaze of the other. They only feel good when they receive approval, affection, or presence from this single source. All others are discarded, often under the guise of love. How many times have you heard phrases like, "I don't like your friends. Your family doesn't understand us. These people are turning you against me. You only need me." At first, it feels like affection. It feels like protection. It feels like care. But it subtly transforms into control. And when you wake up, you're trapped in a bubble where everything revolves around a single figure. And any attempt to escape feels like a betrayal. This isn't a coincidence. This is emotional engineering. Robert Greene says that what makes people strong is the nest they're in. Their friendships, habits, and routines create a sense of security. When you strip that away, you see a naked, fragile human being seeking support. And whoever offers this support, even if they were the one who caused the breakdown, becomes indispensable. The cruel irony is that the victim begins to be grateful for the support offered by the emotional captor himself. In modern relationships, this manifests itself even more dangerously because it's invisible. There are no castles, wars, or royal courts. There are silent apartments, fights over text messages, social exclusion, disguised as "let's just focus on ourselves." And what seemed like intense passion becomes an emotional prison from which the victim can no longer escape, because they don't even realize they've entered. And here's the scariest part. Often, the seducer doesn't even realize they're isolating. They're simply jealous. They want control. They need to ensure the other person has no distractions. And with that, they begin to sabotage friendships, undermine support networks, start fights with family, and criticize old hobbies. It's a slow, progressive trap, but profoundly effective. And the most contradictory part? The victim accepts it. Because initially, this isolation comes wrapped in promises of exclusivity, absolute passion, a connection no one would understand. And those who are needy, insecure, or emotionally open to intense love fall for it. And once inside, everything begins to revolve around the manipulator. Mood, self-esteem, plans, decisions, time, identity. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han says we live in an era of psychopolitics, where control is no longer exercised by force, but by seducing others, where people voluntarily imprison themselves, believing they are making free choices. Silent isolation is a perfect example of this idea. The person believes they are choosing to love intensely, but in reality, they are being shaped, disrupted, and reprogrammed. But isolation isn't always imposed. Sometimes the seduced person creates it themselves. Driven by insecurity, fear of loss, and a desire to please, they begin to distance themselves from the people they love. They begin to prioritize too much, give in too much, and adapt too much. And before they know it, they're emotionally anchored to someone who doesn't know how to handle this power. Or worse, who knows exactly how to use it. The result? A kind of love that appears intense on the outside, but that on the inside corrodes. And the more time passes, the harder it is to leave, because the victim not only loses their bonds, they lose their sense of worthiness. Self-esteem deteriorates, and the idea that no one will ever understand me like they do becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. A closed cycle of emotional dependence. And what to do about this? First, recognize the signs. If you're in a relationship where everything revolves around the other person, where your friends have disappeared, your hobbies have evaporated, your identity seems diluted, there's something wrong. Love isn't exclusion. Love is expansion. Any bond that distances you from who you were before needs to be examined with a magnifying glass, not with the heart. Second, restore external mirrors. Rekindle friendships, resume activities, seek therapy, read, listen to other points of view. The more external references you have, the less vulnerable you will be to manipulation. You need multiple mirrors to see yourself whole. One isn't enough, and if that mirror is distorted, all you'll see is inadequacy, guilt, and a need to please. And finally, learn to love with limits. The toxic seducer takes advantage of those who love too much, give themselves too much, live too much for the other. So the antidote is learning to say no, to preserve your own space, to To understand that loving isn't about losing yourself, it's about finding yourself even more. And that the greatest proof of love is not isolating yourself for someone, but remaining wholeheartedly by their side. Because the true master of seduction knows that total control is the beginning of the end. When someone becomes completely yours, they lose their mystery, and mystery is the fuel of attraction. Therefore, even from a strategic standpoint, isolating someone until only you remain is digging your own emotional grave. The person may even stay, but they will stay out of fear, not desire. And that, sooner or later, implodes. Silent isolation works. It transforms passion into submission. But it also destroys spontaneity, lightness, and authenticity. And in the end, the seducer who isolates ends up surrounded by ruins. A dependent person, an unstable relationship, and a desire that has become a burden. Seduction that imprisons can conquer, but that which liberates builds loyalty. And speaking of desire, there is a third law that few recognize, but everyone has felt. It doesn't come from absence, nor from control. It comes from the crowd, from the gaze of others, the invisible competition that transforms the ordinary into an object of collective fascination. It's the law of other people's desire. And if you think your taste is authentic, get ready. Because the next truth will make you doubt even the people you think you love. Law 3. The desire of others. Have you ever desired someone who, if you stopped to analyze it coldly, wasn't even that interesting? Have you ever found yourself emotionally attached to someone who, if they weren't surrounded by admirers or validated by other important figures, might not even catch your attention? Well, know this. This is no coincidence. It's social psychology in its rawest form. Human beings, no matter how rational they believe themselves to be, have their desires profoundly shaped by something almost invisible: the gaze of others. This is the third toxic law of seduction, and perhaps the most insidious of all, because it doesn't rely on explicit manipulation techniques. It infiltrates our unconscious, it makes what has already been previously validated irresistible, and it transforms anyone, no matter how mediocre, into an object of fascination, as long as they are surrounded by attention. This is the phenomenon of mimetic desire, theorized by philosopher René Girard. According to him, we don't desire things or people autonomously. We desire what we perceive others to desire. Desire is not spontaneous, it is imitative. And when applied to seduction, this concept explains why ordinary people become magnetic when they are in romantic disputes, surrounded by suitors, or associated with prestigious figures. The value isn't in them, it's in the context that surrounds them. This is exactly what happened with Lou Andreas Salome, the woman who drove Nietzsche, Paul Ray, and Freud crazy. She was intelligent, charming, yes, but what made her absolutely fascinating was the fact that all the brilliant men of her time desired her. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, but her aura was fueled by the competition between brilliant men. When Paul met her, he was enchanted. But as soon as she showed interest in Nietzsche, Paul saw her as even more valuable. And when Freud became interested in her, the cycle continued. Lou never needed to beg for attention. Just being there, surrounded by prestigious men, was enough for her social value to rise exponentially. The same goes for artists, influencers, and celebrities. Think of Pete Davidson. How many actually think he's objectively attractive? And yet, after dating Ariana Grande, Kim Kardashian, and other desirable women, his attractiveness skyrocketed. Because other people's desire is a signal of value. An unconscious code that tells us, if everyone wants it, it must be worth it. And herein lies the trap. By desiring what others desire, we abandon our own judgment. We begin to pursue people, relationships, and lifestyles that, deep down, don't make sense to us. But because they seem desirable in a social context, our brains place them on a pedestal. And that's why strategic seducers learn to simulate this desire in others, even when it doesn't exist. They surround themselves with people of the opposite sex. They maintain a network of admirers, ex-boyfriends, hookups, public compliments, likes, and comments. They create what Robert Greene calls an artificial love triangle. There doesn't need to be real competition, just the perception that there is. And that in itself generates attraction, because human beings are competitive. They want to win, they want to be chosen, and desire transforms as if by magic into obsession. This principle is also used by companies, politicians, and public figures. Products launched with limited stock, false waiting lists, politicians who appear to be sought after by various groups. All of this triggers the same thing. If it's in high demand, it must be valuable. And if it's valuable, I must have it. But this mechanism has an even darker side, because it also fuels insecurity. Seeing someone always surrounded by options, you begin to doubt your own worth. You start to compete, compare, and question yourself. And paradoxically, the more insecure you feel, the more you desire that person. Because now, being with them means proving something. Not only that you deserve them, but that you are also desirable. That you won. And this is where this third law connects with the previous ones. Prohibition activates desire. Isolation destroys autonomy. And the desire of others creates competition. The three together create the perfect seducer, or the ultimate manipulator. But the most disturbing thing is realizing that this dynamic doesn't depend on malicious intent. Often, the seduced themselves contribute to the game. They allow themselves to be drawn into the competition. They sabotage themselves. They forget. Because deep down, we all want to be chosen, validated, admired, and for that we're willing to fight, even if the war is for something we didn't even want in the first place. And if you think you're immune to this, try looking at your own history. The people who most captivated you emotionally were probably surrounded by attention. They had options, they seemed contested, and you, feeling like just another one, fought to be the only one, to stand out, to be seen. What you didn't realize is that the desire you felt for them didn't come from them. It stemmed from his own need to prove himself. And that's the cruelest part. Mimetic desire isn't just about the other, it's about us. About our needs, our broken mirrors, our self-esteem hanging on external approval. The desired person becomes a symbol of something much deeper. Our fear of being irrelevant, of not being chosen, of not being enough. Therefore, the true antidote to this law isn't ignoring other people's desire. It's understanding that it's a distorted mirror. That just because someone is desired by many doesn't mean they're valuable to you. That competition is a game for the insecure. And that true power lies in desiring consciously, not needily. Because in the end, seduction isn't about the other. It's about what the other activates in us. And if you don't understand this, you'll spend your life desiring shadows, idealizing ghosts, fighting battles for someone who doesn't even know how to play a play. Or worse, falling into traps designed to make you chase someone who never wanted to be reached, only adored. You need to ask yourself, how many times have I confused someone else's desire with my own? How many times have I gotten involved with someone not because they felt good, but because they seemed like a social conquest? How many times deep down have I just wanted to win and not love? The third law of seduction shows you that love isn't blind. It's influenced, manipulated, contaminated by contexts, perceptions, and validations. And if you don't learn to see this, you'll continue chasing applause and calling it passion. By understanding this law, you gain a dangerous power to become desirable not for who you are, but for what you represent. And at the same time, the most liberating power of all, to stop falling for illusions. Because in the end, true seduction begins when the fantasy ends. And true desire arises when you stop copying the desires of others and start listening to your own. You've come this far and you already understand. Seduction isn't a coincidence. It's emotional engineering. It's strategic psychology. It's the art of igniting dormant desires, manipulating invisible contexts, and transforming presence into power. But here's a brutal truth. Knowing isn't enough. Knowing without applying is just another elegant frustration. Because while you think, other men act, and while you watch, they dominate. You can keep searching for crumbs of attention, trying to guess in the dark, hoping that one day your presence will be enough. But the truth is, without a system, you'll remain trapped on the outside, watching the party unfold through a closed window. And that's why we created the Forbidden Manual. It's not a book, it's a psychological weapon. It's over 7 hours of narrated strategies, condensed, sharp, lethal, based on 8 years of real tests, rejections, conquests, and repeated patterns of female behavior. It's the invisible code of tension, of silent impact, of a presence that doesn't ask permission, it demands to be noticed. Inside, You'll learn to create attraction without saying a word. You'll understand how to arouse curiosity, tension, and desire in seconds. Using posture, hidden language, emotional mirrors, and micro-attitudes that activate deep triggers in the female mind. You'll decipher what words never say and push the right buttons before you're even consciously aware.